Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video we got another news and rumor video to discuss. In today's video we're looking at a signing, a small trade, a couple of injury updates, some waiver updates, plus a couple of trade rumors involving the Capitals, Bruins, Islanders, Utah Hockey Club, and the Seattle Kraken. I'll go to all of that coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the End-to-End Hockey channel. Now before we get into this video, don't forget to like this video and subscribe below. Thank all your support. We're now doing it without you guys, so if you haven't already, don't forget to hit the subscribe button down below and leave a comment down in the comment section below. So you can also see today's video. We're on the road to 500 subscribers, so if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. I'd love to hear your guys' opinion on all that was discussed here today. So in today's video, we got another news and rumor video to discuss. Lots of intriguing things happened. There was an overabundance of news this past week, so that's why I'm only doing one trade rumor video over the past 3 days instead of two as I usually do. So we'll start today's video off by looking at a signing like we usually do. Only one signing for the past couple of days, but it was an intriguing one. It's the Dallas Stars have given Sam Steele an extension. Steele, who'd been bouncing around over the past couple of years, different spots. He started on Anaheim. He got into a couple places. I think he was in Minnesota a couple of times. He spent the past few years in Dallas, and it's actually worked out pretty well in Dallas. He spent the past couple of years in Dallas. Actually worked out quite well as a bomb 6'4" in Dallas. He's in the final year of a one-year deal with the AAV of $1.2 million. So the Stars saw fit to sign him to a 2-year extension with the AAV of $2.1 million. So that's an interesting sign there. Steele's having a pretty dang good season. Last year had 9 goals and 15 assists for 24 points in 77 games. It was a pretty good season last year, only 4 shy of a career high. So far this year, it's been a healthy scratch on a couple of occasions, but it's been mostly in the NHL lineup as like a solid 4th or 3rd line forward. And he's put 4 goals and 17 points in 53 games. He's only 7 points shy of last year's point total. So obviously the Stars see a really good fit with him. He's a solid bomb 6'4", like I said. I think he could work out really well. 2.1 I think is maybe a little bit expensive, but with the cap going skyrocketing over the next few years, I think this is going to be a pretty good deal for the Stars. So he's going to be with the Stars for this year and the next 2 seasons, and just over $2 million with the cap going up. I don't think it's too bad. He can put up between 20 and 30 points consistently, playing a solid bomb 6 minute. I think he also has penalty killing abilities. So all in all, a really solid pickup here for the Stars to sign UFA Steele to a 2-year extension, and I think this could be a really good pickup there long term. So it's an interesting sign there, but the Stars do keep one of their bomb 6 forwards in the lineup for the next couple of years, so that's a really good sign there for the Stars. The only sign we saw from our past couple of days, but it was an interesting one. Next, going over to a couple of injury updates. We only have 4 injury updates here to talk about, so not too much to talk about here today. Columbus's Lindstrom may miss the entire WHL season due to recovering from his injury that he sustained last year, so it seems like it'll depend on how good his recovery is. There's a possibility he could play in late March, early April toward the end of the WHL season, but there has been some talk about Lindstrom, who was the 4th overall pick in last year's draft, may missing the entire WHL season. So that could be a really bad blow for Lindstrom's development. That might send him back a year or two to getting back to the NHL. So we're going to have to wait and see what happens there for Lindstrom. But it seems like he may miss the rest of the WHL season. So we're going to have to wait and see on that. Seattle's Jordan Eberle, who has missed 3 months with a pelvis injury, was given a conditioning stint to the AHL and could return very nearly after the Four Nations faceoff is done. So that's really great news. A conditioning stint is a step in the right direction for Jordan Eberle. So fantastic news there to see him go down on a conditioning stint, and hopefully after the Four Nations is done and we start getting back into regular NHL action, Eberle will be able to play again. So interesting note there, but interesting condition stint there for the Kraken as they sent Eberle to the AHL. Vegas's Theodore suffered an upper body injury in Game 1 of the Four Nations faceoff. It was, I think, a wrist injury or something like that. Didn't look good. He has now been rolled out for the entire Four Nations tournament and is out week to week for the Vegas Golden Knights. May miss a couple of weeks, which could really bleed into the regular season kicking in again. So that could be a really bad blow there for the Knights to lose a solid top-end defenseman like Theodore for a couple of weeks. That's an awful blow there for Vegas as well as Team Canada. And then Makar may miss tonight's game action against the United States due to an illness. So it doesn't seem like he'll miss too much time, but there is a possibility Makar will not play for Canada tonight against the US. So we're going to have to wait and see on that. But a couple of injury updates from our past couple of days. Good to see that Eberle is nearing a return and that he should hopefully return right after the Four Nations. But bad news to see that Lindstrom may miss the rest of the WHL season due to his injury. injury. Bad to see that Theodore is going to be a week to week for Vegas, and bad to see that Makar may miss this upcoming game for Canada due to an illness. So some interesting injury updates from our past couple of days. Going over to a waiver update, only have one waiver update from over the past couple of days. In our last video, we talked about how Devin Shore was on waivers from Minnesota Wild. We said that there was a very likely chance, given the fact he was already on waivers a couple of times earlier in the year, he would probably wind up clearing, but I said there was a possibility with him being a cheap bottom six forward option that some teams really needed some bottom six help. They could try and target Shore on waivers. Well, Wednesday came around and Shore did wind up clearing waivers, so I'm not too surprised. He's already cleared waivers a couple of times this year, so not too surprised he'll be able to be sent down to the minors now for the Wild, and if they run into more injuries, he could be called up again, so we're gonna have to wait and see on that. But interesting note there that Shore has indeed cleared waivers again and is going back down to the AHL for Minnesota. That was the only waiver update. We have not seen any waivers since then, so interesting note there. And lastly, going over to a small trade we saw. It wasn't an overly big trade. It was another prospect swap, as the St. Louis Blues have dealt Matthias Laferriere to the Pittsburgh Penguins in exchange for Corey Andonovski. Both players are in their mid-20s. Laferriere is 24 years old and Andonovski is 25. Both are on one-year deals with AAV of league minimum, and both have been mainly AHL players throughout their careers. For Laferriere, he's going to the Pittsburgh Penguins organization. Might be a decent call-up option. Laferriere last year in Springfield had 7 goals and 25 points in 68 games. So far this year, had 2 goals and 10 points in 33 AHL games for St. Louis's AHL affiliates, was dealt to Pittsburgh. So far has no points in 2 games for the Pittsburgh Penguins AHL affiliates. So I'm not sure if Laferriere will ever amount to anything. I think he could be a solid call-up option. It's a possibility. I wouldn't rule that out completely, because Laferriere seems to be potentially having some options like a solid fourth-line player. So we're going to have to wait and see on that. Like I said, he's in the final year of his deal. He'll be, I think, a RFA, if I'm correct, at the end of this offseason. So we're going to have to wait and see what happens there. But the Penguins add another call-up option in Laferriere. Meanwhile, for St. Louis Blues, they got Corey Andonovski. Now, Laferriere's a center, so that'll help some center depth for the Penguins. Meanwhile, Andonovski's a winger, just like Laferriere. Both guys are on one-year deals with the AV of league minimum, so it's an interesting swap. Last year, Andonovski played in 63 games for the AHL of the Pittsburgh Penguins, putting up 7 goals and 30 points. So far this year, had 3 goals and 5 points in 27 games, so definitely not as productive as he was last year. Hasn't gone to any games for the Blues AHL affiliates at this point, so we're gonna have to wait and see what happens there. But it's an interesting prospect swap. I don't know if these guys will ever amount to anything at the AHL level. Might just be call-up options in the AHL, so but it's an interesting swap there. But Andonovski has been dealt by Pittsburgh to the St. Louis Blues, and they exchanged the Blues deal Laferriere to the Pittsburgh Penguins. So an interesting prospect swap there from the Penguins and the Blues. Definitely some interesting movement from our past couple of days. And lastly, going over to a couple of trade rumors. So to start off the trade rumor portion of the video here, we're going to talk about the Washington Capitals. Frank Seravalli on Daily Faceoff was recently doing some sort of matchmaking, sort of seeing where some players can wind up lining up before trade deadline, and he links Scott Laughton as a potential landing spot in the Washington Capitals organization. Now, he says that Laughton would be a really good fit in the Capitals middle six, could be a solid third, second line forward, give them some more really good playoff style action. Laughton's also signed for this year and a couple more seasons, so it wouldn't be a rental just for this year. It could be an interesting pickup there for the Capitals. He says in his matchmaking thing that the Capitals will probably have to part with a 2026 first round pick, which is sort of the asking price right now, a first round pick for Scott Laughton. It's a steep asking price, especially for a guy who's mostly a third line forward. But for Seravalli says that with the Capitals playing so well, it's sort of like a go for it type year, with Ovechkin still doing quite good. So it's a possibility we could see that, even though we've heard Scott Laughton's name be linked to teams like Toronto and Winnipeg recently. Seravalli does think that the Capitals have to be a possibility, and he thinks it'll be a really good fit there. So we're going to have to wait and see on that. Once again, no linkage between the Capitals and the Flyers around Laughton, just something that Frank Seravalli was speculating on. But Seravalli is a very connected insider, and some of the things do wind up coming true. So we're going to have to keep around the Capitals. Possibility there that they could be in the mix for Scott Laughton, and given the fact he's a solid third line forward, I would not be overly shocked if they tried to part with a first round pick, maybe even to get him. So we're going to have to wait and see on that. But Frank Seravalli, during his figuring out where players could wind up going, did say that Laughton could be a good fit in Washington. So we're going to have to wait and see on that. Next, going over to the New York Islanders. When it comes to the Islanders, we have 2 updates when it comes to Dobson and Nelson. There's some recent reports when Brock Nelson was in the Four Nations face-off, and he was answering reports about the recent speculation that the Islanders will offer him a 3-year extension. And the sort of consensus coming out of those questions and interviews, things were that Brock Nelson's sort of still undecided. Like, it seems like he might want to finish his career as an Islander, but he may also want to go to a much more competitive team. We know the Islanders have been for the past couple of years a fringe playoff team. So could he want to go to somewhere where he's going to be a consistent playoff contender? I think it's a possibility, maybe a little more likely. So even though the Islanders did apparently offer Nelson a 3-year extension, it does sound like he's undecided about signing it yet, and we're going to have to wait and see what happens there. But even though they have offered him an extension, it does sound like Nelson might still wind up being dealt, so we're going to have to wait and see on that. When it comes to Noah Dobson, after the first initial rumors came out, Elliot Friedman put some cold water on it, saying that the Islanders were not shopping Dobson, and they'd only been made available if the right price came along, so they're definitely not shopping Dobson. But then recently we saw Noah Dobson change his agent, so that sort of brought up a lot more questions. Now Dobson is in the final year of his deal. He's going to be RFA in the offseason. He's going to need a new deal. It could be for that, but that's also raised a couple of questions as to see maybe there is a possibility Dobson could get dealt before this year's trade deadline. So we're going to have to wait and see, and that's an interesting scenario that we're going to have to keep our eye on, as I think Dobson could be a really good piece for a lot of teams that had solid top 4 right shot defensemen who might be able to sign a long-term deal in a new organization. So we're going to have to wait and see on that, but we know that Laferriere doesn't like to give out big price tags unless they're really good players, and Dobson's probably at this point looking to command like a $8 to $8.5 million deal on a long-term extension. So we'll have to wait and see what happens there with Dobson if he does get dealt in the next couple of weeks leading up to the trade deadline. But some interesting news. It sounds like Nelson's undecided about signing his extension, and Dobson has changed agency, so we'll have to wait and see what happens there. Next, going over to Utah Hockey Club. According to fourthperiod.com, 3 names in Utah that could be moved and is a possibility to get moved are Olli Maatta, Ian Cole, and Alex Kerfoot. All 3 are pending UFAs. It sounds like Utah is open to moving pending UFAs for the right price, and even though they are only 6 points out of playoffs right now, it's something that they're going to have to consider because they're a fringe team right now for competing for playoffs or being out. So could they move some of their pending UFAs? I think that's a very likely scenario for them to go after. I think they could add some pieces if it helps them in the long term, but I think they might be open to selling some of their short-term pieces and pieces that they don't see being brought back. So guys like Ian Cole, he was a veteran to be brought in this year to sort of help that team. He's not already as like a solid third, second pair of defenseman, but like we say, he's in the final year of his deal. Probably won't be brought back in the offseason if he was to remain in Utah. So I think there's a very likely possibility he could wind up getting dealt. When it comes to Olli Maatta, he was acquired in season. He's also in the final year of his deal. He's a decent third pair defenseman playing over in Team Finland right now in the Four Nations. So he's a solid defender. I think could help a lot of team third pairs. So if the Utah Hockey Club doesn't see a fit long term with him, I think there's a very likely possibility we could see him wind up getting moved. And when it comes to Alex Kerfoot, he's been a solid third, second pair defenseman, can play high in the lineup, can play low, very versatile forward. And I think something that a lot of teams could really use, someone who can be plugged into a hole and really play well. And while I do think he's fit quite well with Utah and Arizona before then, I just think that with him entering the final year of his contract too, there's a very likely possibility Utah may trade him before the trade deadline. So we're going to have to wait and see on that. It does sound like Utah is open to moving pending UFAs, even though they're in a decent position when it comes to the playoffs, only 6 points out. And I think that's a smart move. Even if they were to move out of a couple pending UFAs and maybe call up some of the younger players, I think it's a smart move for a Utah team that I think is still building for the future. And even if they don't make the playoffs this year, they need to gear up for next year. And I think adding a couple more draft picks or prospects will be a smart move for them. So we're going to have to wait and see on that. But keep your eye on Kerfoot, Maatta, and Cole in Utah because they're pending UFAs. There's a good chance they could be moving for a deadline. So we're going to have to wait and see on that. Next, going over to Boston Bruins. According to Emily Kaplan, she says that the Boston Bruins have been receiving trade interest on a couple of players. She says that Brandon Carlo on the defensive end and Morgan Geekie on the offensive end have both been receiving heavy trade interest recently. On top of that, Trent Frederick continues to get trade interest. And Brad Marchand, she says at this point in time, will be unlikely to get dealt before the trade deadline. Now, we also heard Brad Marchand recently, I think it was on an interview or a podcast or something like that, say that his preference is to stay in Boston. So if Marchand doesn't really want to get moved, I think he will try and stay. I think they will eventually work out an extension. I don't think Marchand gets moved, but it is still a possibility, even though it sounds like it's less and less likely now ever since those first rumors came out that Marchand will get moved. But the other 3 are interesting. I think Geekie and Frederick are both pending UFAs. They're both worked really well in the top 9 this year for Boston. Boston is on the outside looking in right now when it comes to the playoff mix. So if they remain like 3, 4, 5 points out, I think they will start to consider moving pending UFAs. Geeky and Frederick are both really good pieces. Geeky can be fit in anywhere in a team's middle six and provide some depth scoring. Frederick can be a solid third liner and produce that sort of physical aspect of the game. So I think the Bruins could get actually really good returns for both Geeky and Frederick. Carlo's a little bit more of a surprising name. He's signed for a couple more years. I think he's at like $4 million. So if they were to move him, that would be an interesting shift. According to another recent report I've seen, the asking price for Carlo is a roster player plus either a second round pick in this year's draft or a top prospect. So it's a high asking price, but Carlo is a solid top four right shot defenseman. If a team were to pony up an asking price for a top four right shot defenseman like that, I could definitely see Boston pull the trigger on it. So we're going to have to wait and see on that. It seems like more and more speculation is coming out about Boston being a seller entering the trade deadline. So we're going to have to wait and see on that. But keep your eye on Carlo, Geeky, and Frederick, as those three guys are players that are getting checked in on in the NHL right now, so we're going to have to wait and see on that. And lastly, going over to Jared McCann in Seattle. Is he available? Now, there was a couple of recent reports I saw over on Twitter saying that McCann had been made available by the Kraken and that they'd be open to moving him. Elliot Friedman touched on that in his recent podcast talking about that, and he said that that's not true. And he said that the reason McCann's sort of been in the trade rumor mill right now is because teams are checking in on McCann and asking Seattle for the trade availability of McCann, not vice versa, and that McCann's being shot by Seattle. So it's sort of like teams are picking up the phone asking Seattle if McCann's available, and the Kraken are saying, no, you need to give us a really high asking price. Now McCann signed for I think 3 or 4 more years at like $5 million, a really cheap ask score he brings. He's a former 40 goal scorer. He's worked out fantastically since the Kraken drafted him in the expansion draft, been basically their star player from the expansion draft. So if they were to move him, they would have to get a monumental return. I'm thinking like a first round pick, solid roster player, and a top prospect for McCann. And I'm not sure if any teams really want to pony up that sort of an asking price. So I think it's more than likely McCann will stay, personally in my opinion, McCann will stay in Seattle. But with the recent speculations about him potentially being moved, it's a possibility. Like, he's a guy who can play center. And we know there's not an overabundance of centers on this free agent market right now, or potentially being dealt before trade deadline. So if a couple of those centers, maybe like a Brock Nelson signs an extension, or like a Trevor Zegras doesn't wind up getting moved, maybe teams turn to McCann as like a sort of target, and maybe they will overpay to try and acquire him. So we're going to have to wait and see on that. I personally do not think McCann will get moved. He's been the star player in Seattle ever since they drafted him, so I don't see him getting moved. But it's a possibility with the amount of trade speculations we've seen recently. So we're going to have to wait and see on that. But that's what we're talking for today. I left you guys thoughts on all this down in the comment section below. What do you think happens with McCann? Does he get moved by Seattle, or will he stay in Seattle? Definitely have your thoughts on that. Do the Bruins move Carlo, Frederick, Geeky, or Marchand? And if so, where could those guys go? I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on that. Do you think that Utah will move on from some of the UFAs such as Kerfoot, Cole, Mata, maybe some of the other UFAs? And if so, where do you think those UFAs could go? Do you think that the Islanders will wind up moving Dobson after he changed agents, or is that just for the offseason for him signing a new deal in New York? Do you think that Nelson will extend in New York, or will he get dealt? And what do you think about Washington? Could they be a landing spot for Scott Laughton? Definitely your thoughts on all of that. Plus the injury updates, waiver updates, signing updates, and the small trade we saw from our past couple days. Definitely your thoughts on all of that down in the comment section below. That's all I'm talking for today or until this video. If you're to subscribe below, thank you for your support. We're to help you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget the subscribe button down below. Don't forget to comment down in the comment section below so I'll discuss in this video. I also have a blog talking about news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that, so check that out. I'll leave a link to that down in the description below. And can't wait to see you guys all for the next video. See you guys soon.